Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I need to shift my questions a little bit from what I intended, just based on some of the conversation that we've had so far. Mrs. Lamb, can you clarify for me, where were you working September the 11th? Were you in the Washington area or in the main facility there?
Yes, sir. I was in the DS Command Center on the evening of the event.
You note that in your testimony, that you're in the Diplomatic Security Command Center, and then you make this statement, I could follow what was happening almost in real time.
That's correct.
So once they hit the button in Benghazi, you're alerted. It says you could have. Did you follow what was happening in real time at that point?
Sir, what was happening is they were making multiple phone calls, and it was very important that they communicate with the Annex in Tripoli, because this is where additional resources were coming from. So they would hang up on us and then call back.
But you're tracking it back and forth, what's going on.
Yes, absolutely.
Then after a very long night for them, they're evacuated out into Tripoli. Correct. Were they in communication with you then once they got to Tripoli? This would have been the next morning at that point.
No, at that point, Embassy Tripoli took over communicating.
So you had no other communication with them after they got to Tripoli? You weren't aware of that, or?
No. They notified us when there was wheels down. They notified us when they got to the hospital. They notified us when they were wheels up en route to
Obviously, these
Germany.
are your folks. I mean,
Absolutely.
I cannot imagine the emotion of that for you. So you had no other connection to know what happened, the details of that, what occurred, these frantic phone calls, all these things that are happening back and forth. They get to Tripoli, and you're not aware anymore of what actually had just happened?
No, sir. We continue to follow them, but half of the team had to be rushed to the hospital
Right.
and treated, and Post was provided. You know, they had just been through a horrific
Oh, it's horrible.
ordeal.
I mean, your detailed account of this is horrific.
And so at this point, providing them the comfort to just come down from the adrenaline and the horror of what had happened, we respected that, and we worked through our colleagues at the embassy in Tripoli.
Right. Here's my struggle with that. You're listening in on the command center. You're in communication as it's going on. They get to Tripoli. There's all kinds of conversations that are happening back and forth as people are checking on them. And yet State Department is testifying still today, 5 days later, they didn't know what happened, that was a coordinated terrorist attack. Maybe this was some spontaneous event that occurred when there was constant communication happening. Did someone come to you and ask you from State, was this a protest? Because I would assume you knew pretty quickly this was not some protest that went out of bounds, because there was no protest even there that day. So it's not like there's a big group of people and 24 people jumped out and started shooting. There was no gathering point at all that day, and I would assume you knew that immediately.
No, sir, it was not clear. It was a very large compound, and each individual agent was looking at what was happening from a different perspective and a different angle.
But was it clear to you there wasn't a protest going on outside? I mean, it's not that large of a compound. You can't see out the front gate to know if there's a protest.
No, sir.
happening.
It happened so fast when they rushed through the gate. It was not clear.
I completely understand. 9:40 at night, but the initial reports were this was some large protest that had happened over a video, and that kind of birthed out of that were people running out with RPGs and had attacked. And Ambassador Kennedy has said that's the best we would know even 5 days later. I find that hard to believe based on your report that you're tracking what's occurring and that individuals, when they get to Tripoli the next morning, are reporting back what happened, that someone didn't say, here's what occurred, and the word protest never came out of it, yet 5 days later no one knows?
Sir, they were all fighting for their lives on that compound. And
I completely understand that. My question is, the testimony seems to be conflicting today. We're getting reports from State that this wasn't them, this was the intelligence community that made this report. But I hear from you, you were aware of what happened and what went on, and others around you, and folks at the embassy. I can't imagine 5, 6, 7 days, 7 days later, the White House press secretary is standing up and still giving the same report, 7 days later, that no one has done this. Now, there are lots of other issues I want to talk about, but I'm kind of amazed at this whole dialogue today, that it seems like no one knew, and there's this best-case scenario of this coming out. And I'm struggling with just the basic facts on this. Now, this is irrelevant to the overall what we're going to do in the future and what happened in the past. But I can't seem to put all these pieces together when I'm getting such conflicting stories with people that are listening to it firsthand what's happening on the ground. Ambassador Kinney, were you want to respond to that?
If I could, sir, there were multiple reports coming out, multiple reports.
Were any of the reports saying there was a protest?
There were reports.
There were reports coming out of Benghazi that there were protests that day.
There were reports that we received saying that there were protests, and I will not go any farther than that. And then things evolved, period. That's that. And if I could, one other thing.
Well, no, before the gentleman goes, you said you wouldn't go any further. I would only ask why you're not going any further. If you want to revise and extend other things, that's fine. But why won't you go any further?
Because I don't want to cross certain lines in open session.
Okay, so you're testifying there are multiple reports, but then in this setting you cannot tell us the multiple reports and where they came from.
In open session.
I appreciate that. We'll arrange for a classified. The gentleman will conclude.
Well, just my one issue is there's ongoing conversation happening. There's ongoing conversations the next morning when they're in Tripoli. I find it very difficult 5, 6, 7 days later, the same story is coming out when there was constant communication with a group of people. It just seems like a very difficult story for me to be able to believe.
If I could.
Of course.
As I said in my opening statement, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lankford, there were multiple reports. We are trying to reconcile the reports because we regard our responsibility to keep the Congress informed. We came up very, very early to talk when we still had multiple threads out there. And those multiple, we were not about to precipitously try to reconcile those multiple threads.